This family is big not only in Wisconsin, but also worldwide. So lots of species in Wisconsin, lots of species worldwide. I don't remember when I got this figure, but 23,600 species. Probably need to update that, but it's pretty big. So we saw before, the other family we said was roughly tied for largest was Orchidaceae, the orchid family, and the monocots. And this one also pretty exceptional set of modifications here. So as we'll go through it, what's really characteristic about this family Asteraceae are the fact that the flowers are grouped together into pseudo flowers. So right off the bat, if you're familiar with this one, this is one of the most generic forms that a person might draw if you ask somebody to draw a flower, right? They draw a circle in the center and then a bunch of stuff coming out the sides. That's a pretty common illustration for a flower. And it turns out in this family, Asteraceae, that those are actually each of these rays coming out the sides are their own flowers. And each of these little circles in the middle is its own flower. So it's a bunch of flowers clustered together. This is probably one of the bigger advantages to this family, maybe the reason why this family has taken off and become so successful worldwide. Before I move on from this slide, this is another family that's got one of these alternative family names. So the formulaic name is Asteraceae, named for the genus Aster. And the acceptable alternative name is Compositae. So some people call these the composites. And that refers to these flowers lumped together. So put together, that's basically what composite means. So Compositae. Lots of variety in the vegetative forms of these plants. We don't have any woody plants of Asteraceae, so that could be helpful to identify these as herbaceous plants. There are some woody ones worldwide. We're not going to worry about them for this. So opposite, alternate, whorled, that's really not helpful. That's all kinds of ways that flowers can be put together on the stem, but they're rarely compound. So leaves can be lobed, but rarely all the way compound in this family. And here's a little bit more of a close-up of what's going on with the flowers in this group. So kind of a wide variety. On the right-hand side here, this one you probably wouldn't mistake for one of these clusters. You wouldn't mistake that for a flower. You'd say that's a flower, that's a flower, that's a flower. They're all very clearly flowers of their own, right? But they're still kind of clumped together into these individual units. And that's really the characteristic feature of this family here. So the inflorescence type, the repeating part of the inflorescence, we call a capitulum or a head. So lots of flowers together. Maybe something that's kind of weird about this one is this green part. I'll try to show you what's going on with that. But there's sort of a set of overlapping bracts that help to also identify one of these capitula. This one a little bit more modified into a couple different kinds of flowers. So this big dome here is a whole bunch of separate tiny flowers. They're opening at different stages. So the ones below have already opened and they're kind of past their receiving time for pollen. The ones that are yellow in this ring around, those have their stigmas exposed, and they would also be offering pollen. And then up toward the tip of this flower head would be flowers that have not yet opened. And this bee knows what's up. So the bee is going through and visiting those individual open flowers as it visits this flower head. So kind of nicely sized for this particular pollinator. And then the showy petals off to the side, these actually belong to individual flowers as well. I'll try to show you that a little bit later. So as I said, this is kind of a generic flower, sunflower, sort of generic, as somebody would usually draw a flower. Now we need to call this something different than a flower. So a flower head here, sunflower head, and then kind of a generic Asteraceae flower head on the left. All right, so a nice highlight here of the bracts. So if we have flowers that are clustered together, kind of together pretending to be a single flower, then they all have their own sepals and they don't really have a sepal system that's outside of those flowers. So instead, they're this collection of bracts that kind of function like sepals. They kind of look like sepals, But understanding how the flowers are put together, you would know that they're not actually sepals, right? So they don't belong, this bract right here doesn't belong to an individual flower. It more belongs to the inflorescence. So a collection of these individually, they're called phyllaries. And another way to call them are involucral bracts. And they're a feature that helps us to, you sort of need a new term when you're describing this part of the flower head, because it's not just, they're not belonging to individual flowers. So flip those flowers over, and we can see there's a few different kinds of flowers going into this family, and different ways that they're put together. So just like we saw in the graminoids, we've got this system of having really small flowers. And so the small flowers, we're going to call them florets, which is sort of like a little flower, a smaller unit of a bigger inflorescence. And a few different kinds of them, and I'll highlight what we've got here. Ray florets and disc florets. So ray are bilaterally symmetrical, and you can think of them as the ones that are contributing to the rays, like this was the sun, right? So just like you might ask a kid to draw a flower and they draw one of these, they might also draw the sun just like this. So having these rays shoot out to the side, those are actually fused petals. You can see there's some notches here kind of telling you that they've been fused of several petals, but they head off toward the outside, and those are the rays. So this flower is actually made up of only rays. If you trace them individually, you'd see that each of those flowers has this long ray of petals. This flower head in the middle here, this is made up of some rays, so 5 ray flowers. This is its own flower. And then in the center, it's got these disc flowers. So disc flowers are radially symmetrical. Sorry, it's maybe a little confusing. The ray flowers are bilaterally symmetrical, and the disc flowers are radially symmetrical. So don't get ray and radial mixed up. If you got one of these, like this bidens, you can see the individual flowers there, radially symmetrical and opening at different times, as you can see here. So this is a combination of ray florets and disc florets. This one is ray florets only, and this one's a little hard to appreciate, but in this thistle group that Cirsium belongs to, these are all disc flowers. So if you took those apart individually, they have these really long petals, which kind of throws you off. So long petals and also long styles, but you'd see that they're radially symmetrical, at least if you took them apart. So, you know, in spite of all the weirdness, they have a pretty regular floral formula. So 5 sepals, 5 petals, 5 stamens, 2 fused carpels. All right, so I kind of mentioned this before. We've got some cases where they're ray only. We've got some that are disc only, and then some that are a combination of disc in the center and ray toward the outside. And just some illustration here of the different kinds. So basically, you might not have thought about this before, but if you look in closely, something like a dandelion, it kind of looks like it has that disc in the center, but if you took it apart, you'd notice that each of these units, if you took it apart, it has its own ray of petals heading toward the outside. So this is rays only, this one is rays only. And then these ones that have a little bit more of a clean, kind of a dotted center, those are disc in the center and ray toward the outside, disc in the center, ray toward the outside. That one's throwing me a little bit. I'm going to defer on that one. Disc in the center, ray toward the outside, disc in the center, ray toward the outside. And then this one is in that thistle group, maybe coming out a little bit more clearly here, where this is a radially symmetrical disc flower, disc flower, disc flower. So it kind of looks like they're serving that ray function, but they're groups of 5 petals coming away toward the outside there. Whew, so much going on with this family. So it has kind of a specialized fruit type, and the fruit type is an achene, and the achene often has an extra layer of tissue that can help it out. So when you have something like a dandelion, the fluffy part of a dandelion is actually what is left over from the sepals. So the sepals are surrounding the achene, they grow out long and they bush out at the top. And it's this highly modified sepal structure, calyx I should say maybe, called the pappus that gives it a new function. So this is pretty common in Asteraceae to have this wind dispersed seed fruit dispersal. So sometimes they get bushy as they get mature. Other ones, this is a case called bidens, where it has a couple of modified pointy bits on there with some hooks that can get into your clothing, or if you're an animal, get into your fur, help that akene to get around. So lots and lots and lots. Some of you might be familiar for economic importance. Lettuce, turns out, is a member of Asteraceae sunflowers, artichokes, chicory, wormwood, echinacea, and then lots and lots of ornamental plants, plants you might find in a bouquet if you buy it from the florist. And then this plant here, this is called burdock, and this was the inspiration for Velcro. So as you get this, it's basically a head of achenes, and what are modified into the hooks are those filaries, the involucral bracts. They're hooked and stiff, and they get into your fur or your clothing. And just like in Velcro, when you hook something in, it's a hook and a loop. It loops into something, and you can tear it apart without destroying it. And it basically will unhook and hook over and over again. And that's the appeal of Velcro, is you can keep attaching and unattaching without destroying anything. So big family needs a lot of classification. This one has some subfamilies, and turns out the subfamilies we have in Wisconsin are not all of the diversity of the family. So that's kind of handy. So we've got these three big subfamilies I want you to know for us. Asteroideae up here in red, Siccorioideae down here in blue, and Carduoideae in green. And I'll go through them and hopefully impress upon you how they are easy to identify from each other. The Carduoideae, this is the thistles. And as I mentioned before, they're disc flowers only in their flower heads. Also typically prickly in their vegetative parts. So lots and lots of prickles. And then this common color is pretty common in the flowers. So it's kind of pink color. So once you see a thistle, there are lots of different kinds of thistles, but they're all pretty commonly in this magenta to blue range of colors, and often pretty prickly. The Siccorioideae is a family, or sorry, a subfamily that has the ray only. So included in that are dandelions, also this one, Trichopogon, goat's beard, in the flowering stage and also in the fruiting stage, also looking very much like a dandelion. Kind of looks like a really beefy dandelion. So knowing the florets of the flower heads is helpful for these first two families. Sorry, I keep saying that. First two subfamilies. And then this subfamily has an additional characteristic where it has milky latex. So if you've ever taken dandelions apart, if you take a piece apart, you'll notice that they are bleeding this milky latex, Siccorioideae. And then the biggest and most diverse, a little bit hard to put this into a single category, but the subfamily Asteroideae sometimes has disc only. If they do have disc only, they're different from those, the thistle flower heads typically. So this is yellow petals or yellow flowers overall. Pretty different from the thistles, not so prickly. And then pretty common in Asteroideae are these flower heads that are a combination of rays along the outside and disc along the inside. Even in one like this is a rather small plant. You might not notice the individual flowers, but once you get in there, you can see how they're put together with these individual flowers and rays along the outside. And also in Asteroideae is this one, I think maybe deserves some mention because we live in Wisconsin and we have a football team, the Packers. This is the Packera genus. Also has some colors to go along with that, green and gold, right? I think that maybe we should call this the new state flower.